Junk Deere recently released the A75 Pro, an upgraded version of its predecessor, the A75, which was released a year ago. If you've ever wanted to try out a rapid trigger keyboard for OSU or other games without burning a hole in your wallet or compromising your productivity, this keyboard might be for you. Let me show you why. Before we begin, Junk Deere generously sent me this keyboard for review. Despite that, I want to be clear that this review is not sponsored, and I'm not forced to read from a script that's wrote by them. Going forward, I'll only accept sponsorships if I can give honest feedback about the product, whether I like it or not, for transparency and fairness. And for the rest of the video, I'll mainly be comparing the A75 Pro with the Wooting 60HE, as I've owned the Wooting for a year now. I still believe it's the best rapid trigger keyboard on the market. But for nearly half the price, the A75 Pro currently sits at $140, but with an ongoing promo, it's reduced to $120, which actually makes it $10 cheaper than the non-pro version. Comparing it to other Hall effect or rapid trigger keyboards on the market, Junk Deere, in my opinion, still provides the most value for what you're paying. If you look at the Wooting 60HE, it's priced at $175, but if you want one, you'd have to wait for a batch, which could take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. If you want a similar layout, the upcoming 80HE is priced at $200, which is $80 more expensive than the A75 Pro. At the time of recording this video, it is available for pre-order, but shipping is expected to start around August. Other options on the market include the Razer Huntsman V3 Pro TKL for $220, the Mini variant for $180, SteelSeries Apex Pro TKL for $190, High Ground Performance Base 65 for $165, Endgame KB65HE for $140, and the ACO Mod 007 V3 HE Year of Dragon for $180. Most of these keyboards except for the Wooting have their own issues and quirks, but I'll get to that later. Let's get into the unboxing. I'm assuming my keyboard was shipped through Fright because mine came with plastic corner protectors. I've looked at other reviews, but theirs were only shrink wrapped. Anyways, you're greeted with a quick start guide, plastic dust cover, the keyboard itself, braided cable, and a keycap puller. It's a modest package, but it should have everything you need. As the name implies, the Junk Deere A75 Pro is a 75% keyboard. It's closer to a TKL layout while still maintaining a shorter form factor, similar to 60% keyboards. It comes with double-shot PBT keycaps, which makes it last longer than any form of ABS before showing signs of shining. It has a volume knob on the top right that has very distinct steps when you turn it, and also acts as a media play and pause button. Currently though, it is not reprogrammable. Unlike its predecessor, it has a patented shock-absorbing feet design that also works when you use the flip-up feet, and I'll explain later why this upgrade could be extremely significant, especially for OSU. You might have also seen some tweets or posts from other people about the A75 Pro having a full aluminum case, but is in fact not a full aluminum case. It does have aluminum accents that improve the build quality, increasing the weight to 1,000 grams compared to the non-Pro's 715 grams. An actual aluminum case is available for the A75, but it's not compatible with the A75 Pro, so be wary of that. I also don't recommend opening it in general because it's held together with clips instead of screws. It already comes with a lot of foam and padding, so there's not much room for additional mods. And here's me doing a quick bend test. The overall build quality of this keyboard is great. I've heard that people complain about the non-Pro being too flimsy, but this one is definitely rigid. Plugging it in, you're greeted with a vibrant spiraling RGB. Do note that I've only tried the Wooting and the stock cable with this. Third-party cables might cause issues as seen from Ryukei's tweet. It comes factory lubed out of the box, and personally, it feels considerably better than when I first got the Wooting. Here's the typing test. And here's what my one-year-old Wooting sounds like. As you can hear, my Wooting doesn't sound as good as it did fresh out of the box anymore. Multiple cleanings over the months have likely wiped away the factory lube, and it might have dried up naturally due to the warm climate here. This keyboard is hot swappable, but as far as I'm aware, it can only use Raisha magnetic switches, so you're only able to replace broken ones. If it is compatible with other switches, let me know in the comments. With a starting actuation force of 30 grams and bottom out at 60 grams, this is similar to the Wooting's Lecker switch, which starts at 40 grams and also bottoms out at 60 grams. Raisha's implementation of Hall effect is slightly different to the Lecker's, but their functionality is the same. What's not the same is the actuation range of the Raisha switches. The Raisha switches have a range of 0.2mm to 3.8, while the Lecker has a range of 0.1mm to 4.0. Some people might say that this small difference is important in game-winning scenarios, but I'd say in real-life usage, it's not too significant since we as humans can't do very precise movements consistently, unlike a robot or a machine anyways. So why are Hall effect switches and rapid triggers so important? Well, on a standard mechanical switch, there's a predetermined actuation point that you have to reach to register an input, and you also have to lift back up to that point to send another input. Hall effect switches, on the other hand, use magnets and sensors instead, meaning you can set them to actuate at any height that you want. With rapid trigger enabled, you don't need to lift back up to the actuation point, which allows you to perform actions snappier. In terms of Osu, this can potentially help you tap faster. On my first week of getting the Wooting 60 HE, I have seen Snow Sleep, which is a 220 BPM Deathstream map. It's that big of a deal. What? What? Moving on to configuring your keyboard, Junktier also has their own web-based software similar to Wutility, but it has some issues at the moment. You have to first select the keys either by dragging your cursor to make a selection box or by choosing the presets on the right. After that, you can change your actuation point and rapid trigger sensitivity, and then save the keyboard. Turbo mode, similar to Tachyon on Wutility, and rapid trigger are persistent through profiles. Also, selecting profiles doesn't activate them immediately. You have to select the profile and then press save to keyboard before it works. RGB is also pretty bare bones right now. You can only use presets, and per key lighting isn't available, so you're stuck using one solid color or any of the currently available RGB effects. It's functional, but it could use some improvements. Now, I mentioned why the other keyboards aren't simply as good as the Wooting or Junktier. To put it simply, Wooting is still the king for both Hall effect and rapid trigger, while Junktier is at a very close second. If we look at the tests done by Optimum Tech, Wooting still has the lowest latency and the most consistent rapid trigger implementation among all the competitors. AimAdapt has performed a similar testing method with the A75 Pro and the Wooting 60 HE and indicates that they're pretty much on par with each other. The only keyboard that's almost on par with the Wooting is the Akko board, but even with an 8K polling rate, it manages to lose to the Wooting, which only has 1K polling rate. So keep watch of the 80HE, which will also release with a polling rate of 8K, and see if that performs better. I recommend watching each individual video to understand the drawbacks of each keyboard. As for the Junktier though, it seems like it won't have any issues with offset for Osu or with movement snappiness in games like Apex, CS2, and others. Hello, post-editing zone here. So I've watched a bunch of other videos of Akko's other Hall effect keyboards, and they seem to be actually good substitutes of Wooting and Junktier, but I have no basis of their latency, so feel free to just do your own research. I might be wrong here, but anything above 2K polling rate seems unnecessary to me. Higher polling rate in gaming peripherals only started to become more apparent a year or two ago, but many games don't support it and would cause the game to jitter and lag. If you're someone who's running a budget PC or laptop, I'd definitely recommend staying at 1K because the higher the polling rate is, the higher your CPU usage is, which causes those jitters even if the game were to support it. Now let's look into the shock absorbing structure, which is potentially important for Osu players. So it's not uncommon that we tap really hard in some scenarios. This feature alleviates potential problems that can come from heavy tapping by providing suspension for your fingers. The best analogy I can think of is tapping on a firm punching bag instead of a brick wall. You'd probably prefer to have that tiny bit of cushioning. And if you use a desk mat, this suspension would be even more noticeable, but you might find little use for this feature if you're fully utilizing rapid trigger, as you're less likely to bottom out, which provides the suspension. If you're familiar with custom keyboards, you probably know that there are various mounting styles. Gasket mount is probably the closest thing to how this keyboard feels with the shock absorption, but it is actually tray mounted. Here's what Kageno and Haikyuu had to say about that feature when I brought the keyboard to them because we were shooting footage for this review. Huge thanks to them, by the way. Personally, I've been using this keyboard for 2 weeks and I haven't had any major problems. One small thing I noticed though is that I had to change my rapid trigger sensitivity to 0.8mm on the Junktier to match the feel of 0.6mm on the Wooting. It's probably because of its different Hall effect implementation. Aside from that, everything else has been working fine. All I really ask for is for the software to be more streamlined. So RGB customization, actual onboard profiles if that's even possible, so that you don't always have to have the software open. Hopefully though, that should just come with time. As for my personal customization antics, Junktier also has springs available on their website. They offer 3 more spring weights, 42 grams, 55 grams, and 69 grams. These weights are the end gram force of the springs, probably just meaning the bottom out weight, with 69 grams being the only variant heavier than the stock ones. If you've seen my tweets or older videos, you might know I swapped my Gateron Ink Black V2 stock springs for 150 gram springs on my KBD 67 Lite R3. Believe it or not, I was actually able to set plays with this absurd configuration. Here's proof of that. Since I'm used to that, I thought I wouldn't like the 30-gram starting force of the ratio switches, but they feel fine to me, especially after having used the Wooting for a year at this point. Apparently, any standard switch spring is compatible with the ratio switches, unlike the Lekker switches, which use a proprietary spring that has a wider diameter, making it harder to mod them. I did successfully mod my Lekkers though by finding one seller on Shopee that sells 120-gram springs, and I've put them on my F and G keys and they work just fine. If you're interested in changing your Lekker springs but live in the US or EU, my best bet would be to look in websites like AliExpress and see if they're available there. Once I get more free time, I might make a follow-up video if I decide to put heavier springs on my A75 Pro and see if there's any issues. In conclusion, the A75 Pro stands out as a great choice for a cheap Hall effect / rapid trigger keyboard. It delivers performance nearly on par with the Wooting and even surpasses many keyboards from bigger brands that offer their own version of rapid trigger. The only downside is that the software is lacking right now, but if you won't be using key remap, RGB customization, or other things such as dynamic keystrokes that the other keyboards have, then I do recommend this keyboard. If you are considering buying this keyboard, I'll put the product link as well as my promo code in the description for an additional 10% off, putting the price of this keyboard even lower at $110. This is an affiliated link that gives me a cut of the sale and helps me spend more time for videos like this. Thank you for watching.